What if the man everyone dismisses as confused is the only one in the room who truly understands what's about to happen? He walked into the hospital slowly, shoulders slightly bent, eyes scanning the corridor with a calm that didn't match the chaos around him. To the staff at the front desk, he looked like a problem waiting to happen. An elderly patient without urgency, without clarity, without importance. His clothes were plain, his voice low, his words measured. And that was enough for them to decide who he was. The receptionist barely looked up as he tried to explain that something felt wrong, that the pain wasn't new, that it carried a pattern he recognized but couldn't quite name out loud. She interrupted him twice, typing loudly, sighing as if his presence alone slowed the entire system down. A nurse nearby whispered that he was probably disoriented, another case of age catching up, another bed that would clog the emergency flow. The label was applied instantly, confused, non-urgent, harmless. Around him, life moved fast. Stretchers rolled by, monitors beeped, doctors debated cases with sharp confidence. No one noticed how the old man stood when alarms sounded, straightening just a little. No one questioned why his eyes followed procedures, exits, ranks on badges. To them, he was just an old patient who didn't know where he was anymore. When he asked a second time to be checked, his tone calm but firm, the response was colder. "Sir, you need to wait your turn." Hand gestured toward a chair in the corner, away from the desk, away from attention. "Sit. Be quiet. Let the professionals handle it." The humiliation was subtle, almost polite, but it landed hard. Other patients watched. Some pitied him, some looked away. No one intervened. What they didn't hear was the discipline in his silence. What they didn't see was the restraint it took for him not to correct them. He had learned long ago that power doesn't announce itself, that authority doesn't beg to be believed. So he sat where they told him, hands steady, breathing controlled, waiting, not because he was weak, but because he understood timing better than anyone in that room. And as minutes passed, something began to shift. Not in the hospital, but in him. A familiar pressure. A warning sign he had felt decades earlier in situations where mistakes cost lives. He glanced once more toward the desk, weighing a decision, knowing that soon, very soon, silence would no longer be an option. If this opening already made you feel uncomfortable, that's exactly the point. Stories like this aren't just about what happens to one man in a hospital hallway. They're about how quickly we judge, how easily we dismiss, and how dangerous it is to confuse silence with weakness. Before this story goes any further, take a moment and tell me in the comments what you would have done if you were there watching this unfold. Did you feel the injustice building? Did you sense something wasn't right? Make sure you leave a like if you believe respect should never depend on appearance, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss stories that expose hidden power, real honor, and moral justice. Understanding the message behind these moments is what transforms a story into a lesson, and your engagement helps keep these stories alive. The moment you hit subscribe, you're essentially stepping deeper into the hallway with him, because things didn't calm down. They got sharper. The old man remained in that corner chair, hands folded like he was holding himself together by force of habit. But now the staff's patience wasn't just thin, it was turning into performance. The nurse who had whispered earlier walked over with that practiced smile that isn't kindness. It's control. She leaned in like she was talking to a child and asked him loudly, "Do you know where you are, sir?" Not because she needed the answer, because she wanted everyone to hear the question. He answered softly, clearly. "I know exactly where I am." That should have ended it. Instead, it sparked something ugly. A young doctor passed by, glanced at the chart, and smirked. "Another confused senior," he said, not even lowering his voice. "We'll get to him when we get to him." Then he looked at the nurse as if he'd just made a joke worth sharing. The nurse laughed, just enough to make it sting. A few people in the waiting room shifted uncomfortably. One man frowned. A woman clutched her purse tighter, but no one spoke. The old man tried again, not pleading, warning. "I need someone to check my vitals. Now." That word now hit the wrong ego. The nurse's smile dropped. "Sir, you don't get to demand things. You're not in charge here." She said it like a lesson, like she was correcting his attitude, like respect was something she could grant or deny with her tone. Then came the humiliation that turned the air heavy. The doctor stepped closer, holding the clipboard like a shield. "Let's be honest," he said, raising his eyebrows at the people nearby. "He probably doesn't even remember what he ate this morning." A few nervous chuckles slipped out, weak laughter from strangers who didn't want attention on themselves. And that's how injustice grows. Not just from cruelty, but from cowardice dressed as silence. The old man's jaw tightened. He didn't lash out. He didn't curse. He just stared at the floor for half a second, as if he was swallowing something bitter that he'd swallowed before in another life. When he looked up again, his eyes weren't confused. They were calculating, and right then, the first real twist happened. Small, quick, easy to miss. A volunteer walking past caught sight of his hands. The fingers weren't shaky. The veins weren't frantic. They were steady, disciplined. The volunteer paused, then noticed a faded mark near his wrist, partly hidden by his sleeve. Not a hospital band. Something older. Something that didn't belong to a man who was just confused. Before the volunteer could process it, the nurse snapped. "Stop hovering, he's fine!" But he wasn't fine. The old man inhaled slowly, like he was bracing for impact. And when he spoke again, he didn't address the nurse or the doctor. He spoke to the room, quietly, but with a gravity that made even the beeping machines feel louder. "You're making a mistake," he said, "and you don't even know what kind yet." Then his gaze shifted toward the front desk, as if he expected something, as if he was waiting for a specific name to appear, or a specific call to come through. The tension he left hanging in the air didn't disappear. It lingered, thick and uncomfortable, as if the room itself knew something was wrong before anyone else did. The nurse rolled her eyes and turned away, dismissing his warning like a delusion. But a few people nearby exchanged glances. Something about the way he spoke, measured, precise, didn't match the story they'd already told themselves about him. As he waited, a clerk began entering his information into the system, fingers moving quickly, bored, almost careless. Name, age, complaint. Then she paused, just for a second. Her typing slowed. She leaned closer to the screen, reread the line, and frowned. It wasn't dramatic. It was subtle. But subtle moments are often where truth starts leaking through. She looked up at him, then back at the screen. His name wasn't common. It carried weight, even if she couldn't immediately say why. She checked an old database by habit more than intention, the kind no one used anymore unless something felt off. When the record loaded, her posture changed. Her shoulders stiffened. Her lips parted as if she was about to say something, but she stopped herself. Across the room, the volunteer who had noticed his hands earlier couldn't shake the feeling either. The old man sat perfectly still, but his awareness was everywhere. When a stretcher passed, he shifted his feet to clear the path before anyone asked. When a security guard walked by, the old man nodded, not friendly, not submissive, but acknowledging rank instinctively. The guard nodded back without realizing why. Then there was the mark. As the nurse finally returned to take his blood pressure, clearly annoyed, his sleeve slid up slightly. Just enough. The volunteer saw it clearly this time, a faded insignia scar, distorted by age but unmistakable to anyone who knew what to look for. Not a tattoo. A removal. Something once important, deliberately erased. The kind of mark men carry when their past isn't meant for casual conversation. The nurse didn't notice, or maybe she didn't want to. She wrapped the cuff too loosely, rushed the reading, and scoffed at the numbers. "See? Normal. You're fine." She scribbled something dismissive on the chart and turned to walk away. "That's not accurate," the old man said calmly. The nurse stopped, slowly. "Excuse me?" "You didn't place it correctly," he replied. "You'll get a false reading like that." The doctor overheard and laughed. "Now he's telling us how to do our jobs?" The room reacted the way systems always do when challenged, defensive, sarcastic, loud enough to reassert control. But the clerk was no longer listening. Her eyes were glued to the screen. A secondary file had opened automatically, triggered by his name and date of birth. It wasn't medical. It was administrative, restricted, the kind of file that shouldn't exist in a hospital database at all. Her heart started to race. She picked up the phone, hesitated, then put it down. Whatever this was, escalating it the wrong way could get her in serious trouble. She glanced at the old man again. He met her eyes briefly, just long enough to let her know. He was aware, not pleading, not afraid. A silent acknowledgement passed between them. Across the room, his breathing changed, controlled but heavier. The pressure he'd felt earlier was growing stronger now. Time was slipping. And still, no one with authority had realized the scale of the mistake, unfolding right in front of them, except one person. The clerk finally stood up, walked quickly toward the back offices, and closed the door behind her. Moments later, raised voices could be heard, urgent, hushed, unmistakably serious. The laughter from earlier died out. The nurse glanced toward the office, confused. The doctor checked his watch, suddenly uneasy. And the old man? He leaned back slightly in his chair, eyes forward, waiting. Because once that door had closed, there was no going. Back to the version of the story where he was just confused. What happened next was fast enough to be dismissed as coincidence, if you didn't understand pressure the way he did. The old man's hand tightened against the arm of the chair. Not dramatically. Not enough for anyone to rush over, just enough to signal that something inside him had crossed a line. His breathing shortened, each inhale precise, controlled, trained. He wasn't panicking. He was compensating. And that alone should have terrified anyone who knew what it meant. A woman sitting nearby noticed his face had gone pale. "Is he okay?" she asked quietly. The nurse didn't even look. "He's fine," she replied, already annoyed by the question. The doctor waved it off too, flipping through another chart, more interested in defending his earlier joke than reassessing a situation that was clearly changing. Then the old man stood up. The movement was slow, deliberate, but wrong for someone who was supposedly stable. His knees locked for a split second. His balance wavered. A sharp pain cut through his chest, deep and familiar, like an alarm he hadn't heard in years. He reached for the desk, not to steady himself emotionally, but to anchor his body long enough to stay upright. That's when the system made its biggest mistake. The doctor finally turned, irritated. "Sir, sit down. You're going to fall." "I need a monitor," the old man said. "Now." The room went quiet, not because they believed him, but because his voice had changed. It wasn't louder, it was lower, firmer. The tone of someone used to being obeyed when seconds mattered. For a brief moment, the doctor hesitated, then pride kicked in. "Enough," he snapped. "You're not having a cardiac event. You're anxious. This is what happens when elderly patients fixate on symptoms." He gestured for a nurse to bring a sedative. "We'll calm him down." Sedation. Without a proper assessment. Without monitoring. The clerk's office door flew open. "Stop!" she shouted. Everyone froze. She rushed forward, breathless, holding a printout with trembling hands. "You can't give him that. Not yet. There's something in his file." Her voice cracked. "There's something very wrong," the doctor scoffed. "This is a hospital, not a history museum. Whatever you think you found is irrelevant." He reached for the chart again, and that's when the old man collapsed. Not forward, not chaotically. He dropped to one knee, controlled even in failure. one hand, braced against the floor like he was trained to fall without breaking formation. Gasps rippled through the waiting room. A chair scraped back. Someone shouted for help. The nurse rushed in too late, fumbling with equipment. The monitor finally attached and immediately screamed. Irregular rhythm, dangerous spikes, numbers that didn't match the earlier normal reading at all. The doctor's face drained of color. This wasn't anxiety. This wasn't confusion. This was a cascading failure caused by arrogance and delay. As alarms echoed, security moved in. The administrator burst from the back office, phone pressed tightly to his ear, whispering words that didn't belong in a civilian hospital. "Yes, sir. Confirmed. He's here. We made a mistake." The old man opened his eyes briefly, pain etched deep now, but awareness still sharp. He looked at the nurse hovering over him and said one quiet sentence, almost regretful. "I told you. You were making the wrong call." And somewhere outside the building, engines could be heard approaching, steady, unmistakable, official. The sound reached them before the explanation did. A low, controlled rumble outside the hospital cut through the chaos inside, steady and deliberate, nothing like the frantic sirens everyone was used to. It wasn't emergency noise. It was authority moving with purpose. The administrator froze mid-sentence, phone still pressed to his ear, eyes locked on the front entrance as if he already knew what was coming next. Inside, the medical team scrambled to recover control. Monitors beeped in sharp protest. A crash cart rolled in. The doctor barked orders now, but the confidence was gone, replaced by urgency laced with fear. The nurse avoided looking at the old man's face, focusing instead on tasks, as if avoiding eye contact could erase the way she had spoken to him minutes earlier. The administrator finally hung up. His hands were shaking. "Clear the hallway," he said quietly to security. Not a suggestion, a command. "Now." Security hesitated, then obeyed instantly, unsure why, but sensing the shift. Patients were moved aside. Conversations died mid-word. Phones were lowered. Everyone felt it. Something bigger than hospital protocol had just taken over. The old man was placed on a gurney, oxygen mask fitted carefully now, movements precise, respectful. As they wheeled him toward imaging, he caught sight of the entrance doors sliding open. Two uniformed officers stepped inside first, scanning the room, without panic, without rush. They weren't police. Their posture gave them away. Behind them walked a man whose presence alone seemed to drain the noise from the space. His uniform was immaculate. His expression unreadable. The rank on his chest wasn't decorative. It was decisive. The commander stopped the moment he saw the gurney. "That's him," he said, not loudly, not emotionally, with certainty. The doctor swallowed hard. "Sir, we're in the middle of a—" The commander raised one hand. Silence. Fell instantly. He stepped closer, eyes fixed on the old man's face. "You held out longer than you should have," he said quietly, almost like a reprimand mixed with respect. Then he turned, slowly, deliberately, toward the staff gathered around. "Who dismissed him?" No one answered. The commander looked at the administrator next. "Who delayed treatment?" The room felt smaller. The nurse stared at the floor. The doctor opened his mouth, then closed it again. There was no script for this moment. No protocol for explaining arrogance to someone who outranked everyone in the building without technically outranking any of them. "He is not confused," the commander continued. "He is not fragile, and he is not someone you speak over." He placed a hand gently on the gurney rail. "This man planned operations that saved thousands of lives. He commanded under pressure you can't simulate, and today you almost killed him because you judged him by how he looked sitting in a chair." Every word landed heavy. The old man's eyes flickered open again, just long enough to see the uniforms, the change in posture, the fear where confidence had been. He exhaled slowly, not in triumph, but in relief. Because now, finally, the truth had arrived, and the reckoning was just beginning. The change was instant, almost violent in its contrast. Where there had been noise, there was now silence. Where there had been casual arrogance, there was rigid posture. The same doctor who had laughed earlier stood straighter without realizing it, shoulders tense, eyes fixed forward like a subordinate awaiting orders. The nurse's hands trembled as she adjusted the IV, suddenly meticulous, painfully aware of every movement she made. The commander didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Authority like his didn't rely on volume. It relied on gravity. "You will stabilize him," he said, calm and precise. "You will document every delay, every dismissal, every decision made in this room today. And you will do it accurately." The administrator nodded quickly. "Of course, sir. We'll cooperate fully." The commander turned to him slowly. "You will not cooperate. You will comply." That single correction cut deeper than any threat. Around them, patients watched in stunned silence. Phones that had been raised earlier were now lowered, hands frozen mid-air. Everyone understood they were witnessing something rare, a system being confronted by a higher standard it couldn't argue with. The doctor finally spoke, voice tight. "We followed standard protocol." The commander met his eyes. "Protocol exists to protect judgment, not replace it. You ignored clear warning signs because it was easier than admitting uncertainty." He paused. "That's not a mistake. That's negligence." The word echoed. The old man was transferred to a critical care unit with a level of urgency that should have been there from the beginning. Specialists were called in immediately. Equipment appeared that had somehow been unavailable earlier. The efficiency was flawless now. Too flawless, almost apologetic in its precision. As they moved him, the commander walked alongside the gurney. "You still alive, old friend?" he asked quietly. The old man managed a faint smile beneath the oxygen mask. "Wouldn't miss this for the world," he murmured. The commander exhaled through his nose, the closest thing to a laugh. "You always did have terrible timing." Behind them, the nurse broke down, tears spilling as the weight of realization finally hit. The doctor stared at his hands, replaying every dismissive word, every shortcut, every moment where ego outweighed care. No one defended them. No one softened the moment. Because this wasn't about revenge. It was about exposure. And the most painful part wasn't the commander's presence. It was knowing that respect, once denied, could not be begged back into existence. As the doors to the unit closed, the waiting area remained frozen in stunned quiet. People sat, differently now. They spoke less. They looked at one another with a new awareness. The lesson was spreading faster than any official report ever could. And yet, the story wasn't finished. Because what happened next wouldn't just correct the mistake, it would define it. What followed wasn't loud. It wasn't theatrical. And that's exactly why it cut so deep. By the time the old man was stabilized, word had already spread through the hospital. Not as gossip, but as fact. Staff whispered in hallways. Administrators avoided eye contact. The story had crystallized into something no one could spin. A veteran with a powerful past had been dismissed, humiliated, nearly killed by a system that confused authority with arrogance and protocol with wisdom. The commander requested a meeting, immediately. In a small conference room, doors closed tight, the doctor, the nurse, 2 supervisors, and the hospital director sat across from him. No phones, no legal teams, no prepared statements. Just consequences. He didn't accuse, he didn't insult. He laid out a timeline, minute by minute, decision by decision, word by word. "This," he said, tapping the table once, "is where respect failed. And this," another tap, "is where judgment was replaced by assumption." The nurse tried to speak through tears. "I didn't know who he was." The commander nodded. "That's the point." Silence swallowed the room. You don't get to choose who deserves dignity based on titles you recognize. Real honor is how you treat the people you think have none. Outside that room, patients watched as the doctor was escorted out. Not arrested, not humiliated, but removed. Pending review. Publicly. The nurse was reassigned. Training mandated. Accountability unavoidable. The director issued a statement before anyone could ask for one. The system didn't collapse, but it bent, visibly, under the weight of being exposed. Later that evening, the commander returned to the old man's bedside. Machines hummed softly. Now. The crisis had passed. You could have said who you were, the commander said. The old man shook his head slightly. Then they'd have respected the rank, not the man. The commander understood. When news of the incident leaked, as these things always do, the reaction was immediate. Messages poured in. Veterans shared stories. Families spoke up. People who had once sat quietly in waiting rooms recognized themselves in the silence that had allowed it to happen. And that's where the real justice landed. Not in punishment alone, but in awareness. Because everyone who heard this story walked away with the same uncomfortable truth. Power doesn't always announce itself. Honor doesn't need permission. And the cost of underestimating someone is often paid too late. If you made it all the way to the end, you're the kind of person who understands what this story is really about. Not just a shocking hospital moment, but the truth that respect should never be based on appearance. So here's what I want you to do right now. Subscribe to the channel because these stories of hidden honor, moral justice, and real-life lessons are exactly what we bring every time. Now drop a comment with this exact phrase so I know you truly got the message. Never judge the quiet man. And if you believe dignity matters, especially for those who served, hit the like button to show it.